Miguel, obviously, I'll let you lead here, but quite exciting day, and excited by the very final panel talk.
Well, it's going to be a very good discussion with Ayesha Barenbladt. She's with us. Hi, Ayesha. And we have also Rizwan Beyg, and we are going to discuss. We have an open talk about social justice in fashion and in the world.
Hey, better. Hey, that's it. All right, guys. Lots of luck.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So, hi, Ayesha. Hi, Rizwan. Very happy to have you here on behalf of the Transformers presentation, and we thank you very much for saving some time for discussion today about that important topic. So I can start with a presentation of you, very short presentation, because basically none of you requires a very long introduction. I mean, you are very well known. So Ayesha is the founder and CEO of Remake. And the main target and the main passion for Ayesha is building supply chains that are respectful with the planet and also with human, which is a mission, is a real mission. It's very important. She has a lot of experience on civil, private, public entities. So there are a lot to offer. And Rizwan Beyg, my pleasure. He's the founder of Rizwan Beyg. Is an atelier that is specialized on high-end type of articles, so bridal and luxury items and everything. But at the same time, he's a worker on social rights for men, women, and rural communities, which is a kind of special, because when you think about designers in France, Valentino, just to say one, I don't think they have in mind men, women, and rural communities. So welcome. Remake is a power of change. So Ayesha, let me start with with an introduction. Can you tell us about when the idea of Remake came to your mind? Where are the pillars? What is the main targets? The evolution? Can you tell us about Remake, please?
Absolutely. Hi, Miguel. Hi, Rizwan, Mamu. So wonderful to see everybody. I'm delighted to be here. It's very early here in San Francisco, 6 a.m. So if I'm reaching my coffee, that's why. So I'm Ayesha. I've spent the last 15 years advocating for the rights and dignity of the women who make our clothes, and having worked with some large denim brands, Levi's, Gap, Marks and Spencer, on the inside, essentially getting them to embed social justice in their supply chain. I then spent some time on the policy side working with the International Labor Organization, where we brought government, brands, and unions to the table to address working conditions. And then what ended up happening is a series of industrial disasters. We had Ali Enterprise happen right here in Karachi, Pakistan. We had Rana Plaza happen in Bangladesh on the backs of the Tazreen fire. And frankly, as someone who had been a fashion insider for a really long time, I had had enough. I realized that we needed a groundswell of all of us as everyday citizens pushing for smart advocacy to regulate this industry. Because today, fashion as a $3 trillion industry is largely deregulated in sending and receiving markets. And so within Remake, we do three things. The first is a lot of education work. We work with a lot of fashion design schools here in the United States. Pre-COVID, we would go into producing nations, taking winning fashion design students into factories and mills to really understand the human impact of their design decisions. I think so often designers are so far removed, and not present company excluded, who centers his design with workers. But a lot of design students don't know. They've never really spent time in a mill or a factory, at least here in the US. And so a lot of our education work is centered on that, centering the makers of our clothes. The second piece of work that we do is around transparency. On our platform, Remake.world, we rate brands based on their records when it comes to addressing the climate crisis and living wages in the industry. And finally, we do a lot of advocacy work. So this last year, the fashion industry canceled a lot of orders pre-COVID, and we were the folks behind the Pay Up campaign to assure that order cancellations did not go through. that women across the fashion industry were paid. We're currently working on the Garment Worker Protection Act here in California that would assure joint liability for any wage theft. So we can get into it more, but really the pillars of Remake is it all starts with education. We need better data to make informed decisions as everyday designers and customers, which is where the transparency work comes in. And then finally, it's really about our campaigning. You know, how do we assure that governments are regulating this industry so we can abate the climate crisis and really center the voices of garment makers who, by the way, are predominantly women of color.
Yes, that's true. That's true. It's a long-lasting endeavor, and it's not easy,
No.
as you say.
It's
And
fun,
there are many challenges ahead. It's an open discussion. So, Rizwan, you feel free to participate and to add comments on everything. Let me add another topic to the discussion. Is, do you think, and if so, why? Do you think the fashion industry is more challenged on social justice? And we know that in the environmental side, the pressure is everywhere. But do you think that social issues are more exposed when they happen on the apparel, on the fashion industry? And if that, why is so? Why is it so?
Yeah, well, I would love Rizwan Mamu to, chime in first as a luxury designer who does the opposite of what a lot of fast fashion brands do, which is centering the voices of makers through the Bunyad Foundation. What made you do that? And what is, I guess, the uptake with customers for a lot of the social impact work that you do?
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to give you a
please.
little background on how we kind of started Bunyad and what the entire basis of Bunyad was. And it all started from a philosophy about what a heavy price we're paying for industrialization. I think industrialization comes with a lot of problems. And this recent, several decades of fast fashion has created so much surplus and so much excess that a lot of textiles and garments are ending up as landfill. So we decided, many years ago, almost a decade ago, that we were not going to prescribe to the fast fashion. And we were going to look at the old fashion, old style design houses that initially started, like Balenciaga, like Valentino, like Chanel, where it was all based on small little ateliers that actually addressed individual clients. There was a lot of couture that was happening. People were catering to individual needs. And there was never any surplus because garments were made with such excellence and each piece was an artistry in itself. So this all became, eventually, when you look at it now, it's all vintage. These are all vintage pieces that have, provided people with so much, delight and, deluxe kind of fabrics and clothes that have lasted so many generations. So when we decided to do that, we decided to visit how fashion was done and then to do a whole thing based and bring back couture. And when we started to do that, we found out that there was this huge divide between the rural and the urban. And the problem was a lot of the women that worked in the rural sector were not being given enough importance. They were not given their social rights. They were not being treated properly. And there was a lot of manipulation and there was a lot of exploitation. So we decided then to try and bridge this rural urban divide and move away from industry, move away from factories, and actually kind of concentrate on little hamlets and villages where women who didn't have the chance to get an education. So the only thing that they could really be taught was a vocational training. So even vocational training in itself was, it was a training program that taught them a lot of skills. And the use of the skills could be applied to anything as basic as a garment that was done by sewing on buttons or something as elaborate as doing a couture bridal embroidered piece. So this is how we started Bunyad. And it's been a good, almost 12 years, 14 years now that we've been doing that, and with great success. And as a result of our initiative, we've been called in by the government of Pakistan to come and try and create job opportunities for women, to be able to open up a lot of doors and to connect them with other designers in urban centers to be able to provide them with a steady stream of work. So that's the basis of Bunyad. And then of course, there's a lot more that comes with the whole setup of Bunyad.
Yeah, but I'd say, one of the key things, Miguel, that Rizwan has touched upon is this problem of overproduction. And, you asked the question around why are we making inroads when it comes to environmental sustainability, but not on the human side. But for us, we really think of the two issues as completely connected. Look, today, just to put in context, we're putting out something like 80 billion units of clothes a year. There's something like 8-9 billion people on the planet, and we know most of that ends up in landfills. And knowing that when we think about the denim industry, it went from being a durable garment, right? Raw denim is a durable garment, to adding elasticity and making it trendy, to pairs of pants that no one wears after a year, and it ends up in landfills anyways. And
yeah,
people often think about it from an environmental lens, but the truth is that the impact on women's bodies is truly devastating. So, ultra fast fashion means that you're working very long hours for very little money. And, it's two sides of the equation. It's, well, why haven't we made much progress in this area? It's because of the prices that big fashion houses set, which ultimately results in not just rock bottom wages, but an inhumane pace of production. Something else that Rizwan Mamu said that's really important is they bring the work to the villages, right? And so outside of addressing overproduction, it's about bringing the source of income to the safety of these rural communities. A lot of the work that we do works with young women who are migrating from villages into the big bad world of cities. And what you end up seeing is a lot of rampant sexual harassment and violence without a lot of protection for these women, because everyone supervisor and up is male, and everyone on the factory floor. In Pakistan, it's slightly different, but globally in the garment industry, it's a predominantly female workforce. So I really do think the two issues are very connected, thinking about the social justice side and the environmental side.
I'd like to add
right. Please go ahead.
I mean, you talked about women, and you talked about how they've been treated. And Pakistan is very unique in the sense that it has a huge Afghan population. And now with the fall of Kabul and the fall of Afghanistan, we've in the past several years have worked with a lot of communities that are Afghan refugees, and the refugee crisis is extreme. And because most of these women don't have options, and because they're not nationals, they're not they're not privy to a lot of government subsidies and government stuff, and they have a refugee status, they get exploited horribly. I mean, they work for less than minimum wage. They're treated, they live in appalling conditions. So when you go into communities and you start to tackle these, I think what it does is you're actually addressing a problem at a humane level and at a grassroots level. You're actually talking to individuals. And nowadays, I think there is provenance with everything people buy. They want to know, where does this come from? Who has made my outfit? Where, what are the, is it sustainable? Is it organic? The same with food. I mean, a lot of the food consumption, people don't want to have GMO-based foods. So I think this is something that we in Pakistan, and especially Bunyad, is now starting to address, is working with refugees. And when we were called in by the government, we actually went to the government and said, look, this is your constituency. This will affect you politically. This is actually going to give you a vote bank. If you start to address these things, and you know this very well, Ayesha, in third world countries, we're not basically industrial based countries. We're actually rural based countries, agricultural, agrarian countries. So it's very, very important that, you actually address these issues at the sector, because when you look at a country and you look at the 3 major cities and all the industry that comes out of this, you fail to kind of contextualize what's happening within. And there's this urban rural, there's a divorce almost, there's a disconnect where you don't really understand. And I've been in to a lot of places where people are sitting in large drawing rooms and telling us what this country needs. They don't know what this country needs. They've never been to the villages. They've never seen how the other half live. And unlike the West, in Pakistan, there is a lot of poverty. So, it's a completely different culture.
Yeah, I mean, I tell you though, you want to see poverty in sweatshops. We have them right here in LA as well. So I think there's a in the fashion industry. I give you one stat. In the pandemic, even with the industry canceling orders and wanting to shore up their own balance sheet, as the West is coming out of the pandemic, the market cap for the largest fashion brands grew by 11%. Meanwhile, wages for garment makers globally fell by 21%. And therein, I think, lies the dichotomy of why we don't make progress when it comes to social justice, because often the industry is profitable on the back of labor, essentially treating her as a cost center rather than an asset.
Well, here I want to add something. It's about the imbalance between brands. I mean, the face of the fashion to the consumers and the supply chain. The problem is that brands have all the power. of decision. So they put all the mills in competition for lower prices, and then they put even the countries in competition. So they have no problem to move the sourcing from one place to another. For them is very easy. But what that favors is poverty, because if the mills, the companies, the suppliers, they want to compete, they are kind of forced to do something. And the brands are not paying more. I mean, they're not saying, listen, apart from some exceptions, they're not saying, listen, we understand it's a complex situation. COVID has been a disaster and everything. Let's do something together. Unfortunately, this is not the common position of brands. What do you think about the position of brands in all this social unfairness?
I mean, obviously, in some ways, the colonial model of our part of the world never went away, right? So we had the West colonized Pakistan, and now many ways the supply chains operate in that exact way. You know, having talked to a lot of mills and factories in Pakistan, this race to the bottom really is unsustainable. And so I think, you know, some of the young designers are thinking about the industry of the future. It's like, well, look at what Rizwan has built. And maybe in order to take power back, you have to think about the direct to consumer market. You have to think about the opportunities domestically, or even with the West as sustainability grows, you know, what could that look like if you were a manufacturer and a brand yourself? So that's sort of, you know, putting that out there. Certainly prices is the biggest thing that drives all of this, right? And one of the things that we work in is the non-transparency of prices. You know, fashion brands will never tell you how much they're paying a piece. And it's like, oh, you know, we are going to get into all kinds of issues if we publicly share that. But, you know, with the Pay Up campaign, we had manufacturers leaking us info, like these are the brands that are canceling orders, or they're retroactively asking for discounts. And so I think we need manufacturers, especially in the global South, to come together and push back on some of that. And I know with Transformers Foundation, the Star Network, there are some efforts to do that, because at the end of the day, Pakistan has cotton, we have mills, we have factories. We could be a denim sustainability center if we wanted, rather than competing down to the last cent, which, you know, at the end of the day, no one wins, and the women on the factory floor lose the most. So I think something has to give in the system.
On denim, I think it's slightly different to the fashions. You know, on denim, for example, what Rizwan mentioned about vintage. Vintage is a property. It's a good thing. It's an asset on denim. I mean, we love, you know, vintage designs, and we copy vintage designs modernly. That's also a good thing in Pakistan that you mentioned, because in Pakistan, there is a phenomena that do not happen often in other parts of the world, is that a vertical mill has a brand, and the brand is global, because the headquarters might be in Paris or in New York. So, and this is a good business model, because the control of everything is absolute. And they are kind of forced to be transparent, because they are responsible for all the chain. So, and it's a model that works well in Pakistan, but unfortunately in other countries, well, the conditions are not right. The example of Rizwan Beyg is something that has to be exported, you know. It would be good to have other designers.
How has the Pakistani customer base, you know, reacted to that, and sort of the reforming of your label to center makers? And do you have aspirations to, you know, export to the West?
Well, I think one of the main questions that I constantly ask myself is, because, you know, we're expanding, we're growing, we're opening up different stores. And my question is, how big is big? You know, when you talk about scale, and you talk about surplus, and you talk about manufacturing, you know, I mean, how many pairs of jeans can anybody buy? How many pairs of jeans can anybody wear? I mean, I've had a pair of solid jeans that I bought 30 years ago that is frayed, and I don't get into it because I've become fat, but it's still there. The fabric is still there, and it's the proper indigo dyed base. So, you know, things like indigo, madder, and I keep talking about provenance now. I think customers are also becoming very savvy. I think they're understanding, and I think there is a lot of pressure by a lot of the people in different countries who have developed a conscience and want to, you know, question the manufacturing scale. If you want to grow, how big do you want to grow? Do you have to become industrial? Can you be semi-industrial? Can you actually share, you know, your craft and get the basis done through industry and then do supplementary work by women and do a collaboration and a marriage between, you know, rural work and industry. And I think for me, that is the most important question. And I think that is the only way forward, is actually if you marry industry with cottage industry and come up with a product that is not only beautiful and individual, but also something that is sustainable and something that can actually provide living not to large industrial corporations, actually to kind of get a lot of money in to the poverty areas where people actually need the money. And it's a kind of not only social justice, it's a kind of you know, liberal communism, if you must, you know, or a socialist order where, you know, everybody who partakes in the system at least gets a small section of it and they're not exploited. So for me, I think the most important thing is scale. You know, why do you want to make, you know, like you said, you know, why do you want to make 80 million garments? You don't need that much. You have 9 billion people. So why are you making 80 billion, you know, garments? So I think these are questions that industry need to ask each other. They need to ask themselves. And there needs to be some kind of a conversation between those kind of people who are very big in the industry and see, you know, what is the best way forward. COVID, I think, was a huge eye opener. I think the kind of labels that fell apart and had to go back to nature, had to go back to a more organic life, had to deal with so much. So I think nature is the balancing factor, and it actually brings everything back to ground zero.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Touching on this notion of just sustainability scale is so important, because when we are rating brands, the bigger the brand gets, the more ill-disciplined the supply chain is, the more far removed you are from your workforce, the harder it is to center issues of social justice. And so, you know, we often train we have a group of 900 change makers up and down the country who are out there talking about wearing their values, buying less, buying better in their communities, in their colleges. It's to say we have to get back to basics. We have to be applauding brands like Rizwan's, because the truth is, if you are an ultra fast fashion brand, your current incentives are set up to pump out as much trendy product as quickly as possible, get the photo on TikTok and Instagram, and then throw it away, you know.
And at the lowest price. I mean, also at the lowest price. I think price is the huge determining factor when you talk about stuff. I mean, you walk into a store, whether it's H&M or any other major brand, I think it's all based on pricing, and people are undercutting to bring their prices lower to, you know, be able to target a larger section of the market. And it's appalling. It's really appalling, the kind of price cutting, and the price cutting eventually affects the women who make the garment.
Yeah. So I think for anyone who's like wanting to talk about, look how wonderful, you know, this cheap haul is, or something that I bought, it's to say, well, actually what you're wearing is the exploitation of women. Do you really want to do that? You could now rock on with your H&M pants.
I have a proposal because our time is up now, but you know, this panel is so interesting, and your collaboration is so important. I mean, that we have to repeat that, you know, on a different scale on eventual educational events that we do, or even for professionals. So because we Transformers Foundation, we organize Transformers AD, and it's for students, as you said. So we want you to maybe to end that wonderful discussion, if you want to pass a message to not only the students that are still following this presentation, that's going to be on the internet, on our webpage. So if you're going to pass a message to the young designers, to the young people that are going to drive the industry in the future, what you will say to them?
I'd say really that you are the hope of the future, and that it is possible for the fashion industry, which we all love, right? We entered this industry because we love it, for it to be centering what's most essential, which is not being a party to the environmental destruction, the ecological damage that has become so synonymous with the type of design that we're currently creating, and that you could make something beautiful that actually centers the voices of the makers. And that is, I think, truly the future of fashion. You know, there shouldn't be a sustainable fashion and a different fashion. Just the future of fashion should embed sustainability from the start to the finish. And so I hope, you know, designers listening in are hopeful, especially given who's in our company, who's, you know, managed to create this incredible brand with a loyal customer following that does things right. It is possible.
It is actually. So as Transformers Foundation, again, on behalf of the Board of Founders and everybody, thank you very much for your insights. Wonderful discussion, really. I look forward to, you know, continue this you know, good exchange of opinions. And as Transformers Foundation, again, you know, for anything you may need on the field of denim. Even Rizwan, if you want to start your own ideas about denim, listen, Transformers Foundation, as a representative of the supply chain, will be with you. We will collaborate with all the right initiatives to save fashion, to save the planet. So thanks very much.
Miguel. Very kind of you. Thank you.
Yeah.
My pleasure. Have a very good time in Pakistan. And sorry, Ayesha, it's so early in San Francisco. I wish you a very good day.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah,
thank you. Thank you very much all once again. Thank you. Cheers. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.